it up for Chuck, yes. Being a board member for One Payer States, it has definitely, how's this? I have a small voice, so. Being a board member with One Payer States, working with Chuck and Barbara has been a tremendous, refreshing experience as we learn to be able to identify and actually define what allyship means. A lot of times when we talk about allyship, it's more so symbolic. And what I found with One Payer States is not symbolic. We are a part of the visioning, we work together, we have cohesion. So that's what I want to speak on today, how we can be more cohesive when we are working with our different demographics, our different identities, our different backgrounds, right? Okay, so again, as Chuck said, I am Lode. I am a Gullah Geechee woman. My heritage is out of Georgia. So if anyone familiar with Gullah Geechee people? Awesome. So we have a historic corridor, a heritage corridor that will take you from the Sea Islands of Wilmington, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. So all of those Sea Islands up in there are Gullah Geechee people. And again, my lineage is out of the Savannah, Georgia area. So before I get started, I'm just going to pour a little water. We call it Omi water. Omi tutu, cool water, right? To keep me cool. As you could imagine, speaking about reparations and some of the injustices that we all deal with, I'm a very fiery and passionate person, so I want to keep it cool today. So, Omi tutu, ile tutu, ona tutu, tutu la voye, tutu bombo orisha, tutu bombo irumole, tutu orimi, tutu ori inu, tutu oriwa, tutu egungun, tutu egbe ashe. So pretty much what I said was cool water for the ground, cool water for my head, cool water for my feet, cool water for everyone up in here, right? All right, so let's get started. I'm going to go back to the beginning of this slide deck, and I believe you all have a copy of our Arc of Justice infographic. So we're going to talk a little bit about the global Black experience, resisting suppression, and the demand for redress. And I want to highlight, when we are speaking of global resistance, the demand for redress, we are structurally correcting historical wrongs, structural wrongs. We have to correct it structurally. This is why symbolism will not do it. Simply apologizing for it will not do it. This right here is something that can be taken to any demographic, what I'm going to share. So not just with your Black friends, but your Hispanic friends, your Hindu friends, your Asian friends, which, however it may be that they feel that they are suppressed, this can be replicated, okay? All right, so we're gonna have a discussion, an examination of the shared historical and present-day systems, political, economic, and social oppression that impact Black communities across the African diaspora. And of course, we know that means across the globe, right? All right, so we're going to explore shared experience of oppression across the African diaspora, however we're going to pronounce that. Examine historical and modern systems of racial suppression, and understand collective demands for justice and symbolic redress. So we're going to start with the legacy of the Ma'afa. Who knows what the Ma'afa is? The Ma'afa is the transatlantic slave trade. That is our cultural name for it, the legacy. So as you can imagine, we would have institutionalism, institutionalized segregation, apartheid, and racial hierarchy systems. Now, this is globally, right? Because the transatlantic slave trade took place across the globe. It wasn't just us. In fact, we saw it on the continent of Africa first for about 1,000 years before it came over to the U.S. So, yes, institutionalized segregation, we see that across the globe. Apartheid, we mostly see that in South Africa, but in places across the globe. And then again, the racial hierarchy systems. A lot of times we see hierarchy, we call it racism, we call it ableism, We call it sexism. We call it the caste system. All of those isms come out of the fascism, because in order for these systems to thrive, you have to have fascism first, right? So this is another reason why our topic is, if you look on your program, structural innovations for resilient global resistance to fascism, because that's what we're dealing with across the board. All of those isms come out of fascism. So next, of course, comes colonialism. So after you've done been snatched up and raped, robbed, pillaged, you're going to be colonized, right? That happens everywhere. But then again, of course, colonialism and the exploitation of black nations and communities. What does that look like? It wasn't just physical. It was mental. It was spiritual, right? All of the planes that we exist on, that's where we experience colonialism. So again, this is why symbolism is not enough. We need spiritual healing. We need physical healing. We need mental healing, right? And then, of course, post-colonialism, neo-colonialism, right? Now, I will put in this little tidbit. The only part of the African diaspora that has not experienced neo-colonialism, who would like to guess? America. So here's a tidbit. The American black, the American indigenous, we were not colonized. We're occupied. Colonization came here, but the wars against the indigenous won. The U.S. does not have a victory, war-wise, over its indigenous population. None on record. When we went to war with the Gullah Geechees won. So the U.S. strategy was to take the land from under the people's feet, because they couldn't just outright beat them for hundreds of years. So they took the land from under their feet and then reclassified them. So the only place throughout the African diaspora where the black-bodied people, the black-skinned people were not actually colonized, but were just sat on, right? That's why we have laws and stuff like that. And every 7 to 10 years, the laws have to be updated, because they can't suppress its suppression class. The suppression class figures it out and say, hey, well, let's write this kind of law. Let's have the civil rights movement. You don't see civil rights or anything like that happening anywhere for a part of the African diaspora. You don't see it. Only here, because we were just sat on. We were not necessarily defeated and wiped out and then replaced. That did not happen here. So we don't have neo-colonialism. But if you go to West Africa, neo-colonialism. South Africa, neo-colonialism. Brazil, South America, neo-colonialism. But what is that? That's after you've been colonized, right? Many of these countries in the diaspora, they received they established themselves as independent nations. And then I will say this also. Those independent nations you're talking about happened during what time in history? What was happening in the U.S. when many of these African countries were getting their independence? The Civil Rights era. So it was black Americans that said, hey, let us show you how to stomp on the oppressor. And we went and we were part. Every nation that got their independence, there was a black American that was a part of it. Because they didn't have that wherewithal. Again, because they were in neo-colonialism. They were in colonialism. We were not colonized. We've been fighting, and the fight continues. So anywho, generational economic exclusion and disposition. Now, while black Americans were not colonized, the result is the same. So this is why when we hear the arguments of foundational black Americans versus the immigrant black-skinned people, right? They tend to put up verses. There is no verses. Again, our objective is to build codification, cohesion. So there is no verses. We're the same. We're dealing with the same oppression. We have the same outcomes. So we may not have been colonized, but we're dealing with the same stuff. Okay. So modern systems of oppression, right? We have voter suppression and attacks on the democratic participation. We see that everywhere. And Chuck, man, I thank you so much for being concise as we would say, you laid it down quite flat. When we have fascism, when we have these dictatorships, that's the first thing. We're going to strip your rights to say anything. You cannot argue us. We're going to take your freedom of press. We're going to take your freedom of voice. We're going to take all of that. So you can't even argue us. Then, of course, we have mass incarceration and the criminalization of black communities. I was just talking to my children about that this morning, because a lot of times when we're talking about public assistance, the first picture that you get is some kind of black-skinned person. When you think of the frauds using the public system, you think of some black-skinned person. That's not the case. Even just community-based, all communities, whenever you have a community of people living within close proximity of themselves, they are violent towards each other. And we know who are the most violent in this country. But when you think of violence, you think of who? Black people, for some reason. It's not for some reason. It's not a coincidence. That's the propaganda. So black people are now criminalized just for being and doing the same things all humans do, right? Unequal access to healthcare, housing, education, and economic opportunities. I'll share with you a QR code at the end of this where we want to keep in contact with you simply because we have our 5 pillars of affordability. These are the 5 pain points that all communities are experiencing, right? However, when it comes to healthcare, housing, education, and economic opportunities, it is spillover because it is the harms that were intended for black-skinned people. Again, you have the fascism, and the fascism is going to drive that whip, right? But it's the harms that was intended for black people now spilling over. So now everyone is suffering. Greed has no stop. Greed has no moral. It has no moral compass, no character, button, no nothing. So it's going to keep going, right? And that's where we're at today. Then we have the Pan-African solidarity movements across Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas, of course. And then we have cultural resistance as a tool of preservation and political power. This last part, cultural resistance. A lot of that cultural resistance, again, is being in unison with each other, being in community. And not necessarily just black people being in community with black people, but being amongst our people. Like, you guys are here, you're our people. We're all each other's people. Right? Because we have the same concern. We have the same desires to want to thwart or defeat the oppression, get ourselves from under suppression, right? We have a shared goal. We have a shared vision. So this cultural resistance is not just something that's, when we're speaking of culture, like heritage, but it's more so just having a codification. Understanding that when I see you, okay, and I see my brother, when I see you, I see my sister, because we're all in this fight together. Again, there is no versus. That's the oppressor that wants to divide and conquer. You have to divide the people by getting them to go against each other. So now, global black resistive measures, or movements, excuse me. We have some hyperlinks, but I know we started kind of late, and I don't know if we can recoup the time, so I'm going to just keep it moving. Of course, we talked about the civil rights era. We talked about the anti-apartheid. We talked about Pan-African solidarity. Who would be considered the father of Pan-Africanism? Do you guys know?
Du Bois?
Ooh. Man, okay, so no, but. I was talking to my children about this just yesterday. W.E.B. Du Bois, Paramount. He was a hero and a villain. How was he the hero? How was he the villain? Well, the father of Pan-Africanism, Marcus Messiah Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois was anti-Marcus Garvey. However, the efforts that he put forth, the work that he's done, of course, we're still talking about him today. We would not be where we are today without W.E.B. Du Bois. But he was also anti-black as far as the liberation of black people, foundational, Pan-Africanism type things. But it was Marcus Garvey, because Marcus Garvey actually believed in doing business with each other, not just philosophy. W.E.B. Du Bois believed that we would get our liberation through philosophizing, right? Going and having conversation and lectures like this. Marcus Garvey believed in philosophy, but also action. We needed economics. We needed to be a part of business, right? Making money. And then also unifying Black people across the globe. So Pan-African solidarity movements, and then of course again the cultural resistance. I do want to show this because I think this is funny. So there's a thing where people think Black people don't know that there are Black people across the globe, right? Because representation matters. So here, oh no. Are you going to let me click on it? Maybe not. Oh, I don't know what that says. I can't see it. There we go. And then we have sound.
In the upper left corner, you need to
Thank
drag. There
you.
you go. Right there. Click it.
Now, before you could hear him talk, what did he look like? Did you think he was Scottish?
Yeah, what is it about all these Americans just finding out about Black Scottish conflict here? This is genuine new. I feel so special right now. I'm looking through some of my comments, and some of them are thinking, y'all exist. And I'm just like, he did. There's Black kids in Scotland, mate, just normal kids like me and you. Like, I'm flicking through some of my comments, and some of them are still typing, y'all are rare gemstones. And it's like, it's weird, because like, when I'm reading the comments, I can actually hear myself in an American accent. It's fucking weird. But there is Black kids in Scotland, and we do exist.
So I thought that was funny. But going back to the cultural experience, right? Being able to see each other, being able to say, hey, we are with you, we see you. I didn't went too far. A lot of times, when it comes to that cultural solidarity, is not necessarily saying, there we go. It's not saying that, hey, I'm Black American and we cannot be together and you have your own experience and I have to have mine. There's no verses. Because again, when you're talking about black-skinned people, just looking at that man, you would think he was what? Will we have an inkling that he was Scottish? No. I know for me, no. He looks like a Black American. He looks like an African. He looks like any type of brown-skinned, afro, curly, textured hair person across this globe. So that's why we cannot have that separation. We cannot have the verses. Because again, when the oppressor sees us, they see one. Y'all heard that phrase? One big Black person. That's what they see. One big Black person. It doesn't matter, right? So of course, the demand for redress, reparations as economic and moral accountability, not just symbolism. Repairing wealth disparities created through systematic exploitation, institutional acknowledgement of historical harms, and then policy reform centered on equity and restorative justice. This right here, this reparative wealth disparities, a lot of times in opposition we'll hear that, we can't give reparations because we don't have it in our budget. We don't have it. We can't give it. How much would we give? Who would get it? And I want to put this on your hearts, if I could, right? If we are talking about a country like America that built all of its wealth off slave labor, how much of that would be due back to the descendants of slavery? Any guess? All of it. All of it, right? If I came in your house and you had your children and I came, kicked you out of your house, took your house, and generations you done passed that house down to your children, and my children are living in the streets, is that a pick yourself up by your bootstraps? No, just give the house back, right? Just simple. It's the whole house, not a bedroom, not a kitchen, not the living room, the whole damn house. However, where we are today, that would not be, the best ideal situation, right? But a substantial amount of wealth must be transferred back into the Black community for repair, for redress, right? We need the structure. Policy reform, that is redress, because it was the policy that allowed for the disaster. It was policy that allowed for harm. So in order to fix the policy, we need money, right? Then the byproduct of policy, mental illness, physical illness, spiritual illness, that requires money too, right? Only because we live in a society that requires money. So we need the monies. Cut the check. You may have heard that before. Cut the check. Cut the check. So pathways toward justice, and we have 2026, 27, 28, and 29. Just showing you on the scale of where we are and then where we need to be, right? Grassroots organizing and community-led advocacy. That's from point A, and it's going to take us all the way to point Z, right? There's no time that we should not be talking to the people, to communities. Then we have legislative reform, addressing structural inequity. We have our omnibus bill that's drafted now, and we're looking to have it passed in 2028. So we have from 27, that'll carry us all the way to 29, because we're sure that in 27, when we introduce it, we're going to get some pushback. We need to make some modifications, etc. But we want to make sure that that thing lands, that it passes in 28, because in 29, we have other pieces of legislation that needs to follow through with it. But this omnibus bill is going to do the meat and potatoes, the heavy lifting of repairing the Black community, foundational American descendants of slavery. Then we have, here we go, international solidarity and cross-border coalition building. This is what Chuck was talking about, building that infrastructure, right? We're in that process now, but in 2027, what is it, J1, Q1? We're off. Train is out of the station. And then again, building sustainable economic and political power in Black communities. That comes once we get this legislation down. Once we get the legislation concrete, we'll have that building, right? We'll be able to build that the sustainable measures as a result of the passing of the legislation, or even the increase in the conversations around that legislation. But then here we are, this shaded area, that's where we are about now. Okay? So our call to action, pretty simple, pretty simple. Justice requires acknowledgement, accountability, and repair. Again, not symbolism. I'm not one that says, oh, an apology, we got to start with an apology. I don't care about the apology. I personally agree. Acknowledgement is better than apology, because simply, what are you apologizing for? If it wasn't you that did it, if it was your forefathers, do you feel that apology, or is it just out of obligation? I don't want an apology. I want the money, though, that part. I want the change in the policy. That's more effective. We can let bygones be bygones. I don't need an apology. But that's just me. Global solidarity, strength, collective liberation efforts, right? This is going to take all of us. And then redress is necessary to confront generations of systemic harm. I remember when it was a particular study that came out. It showed that, it was done for the Jewish community at first. It showed that Jewish mothers passed down trauma to their children. Now it's a more generalized study, because we understand that the trauma is passed down through the mother anyway. So it doesn't matter which demographic we're talking about. Whatever trauma that mother experienced, the baby's going to have the trauma response without having to experience the trauma. We call it the butterfly effect, right? This is why symbolism doesn't work. We need repair because we need counseling or therapies, right? We need to get back to our spiritual practices. Westernized religion is not what does it for descendants of American slavery. That was not what our ancestors practiced. So we have to be able to get back to what our ancestors did. Some of us are fortunate enough to be able to do that. Others have no idea that that's what they're missing, right? And if we're looking at it from a physics perspective, that it happens in the spiritual realm, the unseen realm first, before it happens here. In order for any type of healing to occur, we have to get right spiritually first, before we can do anything physically or mentally for that matter. Then collective action builds equitable futures for the next generation. So as we are healing ourselves, healing our cohorts, healing our collective, then we can build something that will last us. Again, symbolism will not last. Symbolism is not sustainable. A statue is not sustainable. A museum is not sustainable. We need tangible measures that's actually going to rectify the harm caused. So these three join the International Black Brain Trust. So when we talked about partnering across the globe, and remember I mentioned that all of the African nations that got their independence in the 60s, it was because Black Americans then went over to help them. That's the modern day rendition. This is our modern day. We have tools now, political tools, social justice innovation tools that can help other groups across the globe. And we meet up once a month on Wednesday to talk about it, right? We hear what's going on the continent, in the UK and South America, and then we say, well, here, it sounds like you need this tool. It sounds like you need to talk to this person. Do y'all have this person over there in your government? That's who you need to talk to, right? This is review our 50-state HR 40 policy brief. Are you guys familiar with HR 40? HR 40. HR 40 is the House resolution that brought forth the study for reparations. It's saying, hey, let's study it. We're going on about, 92,000? We're going on 30 years of not passing this bill. So, my organization, we reached out to Representative Ayanna Presley and we spoke to her and we asked her because she's now the new leader of this bill, right? The new sponsor, the lead sponsor of this bill. And we talked to her about her concerns and about her actions, what she plans to do to move this forward. And based on what we got, she said that she's concerned about capacity. So we put together this 50-state brief to let her know where HR 40 would be effective. Because if you could imagine, 30 years down the line, not all states require a study. Some states are past the study, and they're at the implementation phase. So we're talking about Georgia is at implementation. Pennsylvania, implementation. Illinois, implementation. California, implementation. But when you're talking about like Colorado, they definitely could use the study, right? So there are some states that don't require a study any longer because we've gotten a bit antsy. We've already done the study independently. And that's the thing as well. Why do we need legislation to say we can study reparations? We have nonprofits, we have independent research, we do it anyway. That's what that's what we've learned, right? We don't have to wait. And from that, once we gave this policy brief, she then charged our organization with writing the Reparative Justice Omnibus Act. So you can download that outline. You can download the policy brief for HR 40. But this outline is based on, again, our 5 pillars of affordability. And then some, because of course, to repair the Black community, there are other areas that need repair as well. But the 5 pillars of affordability, we're talking about healthcare, transportation, energy, food, and what was the other one, Chuck? Housing. Thank you. And then when we're talking about the Omnibus Act, we have all those 5, but then we add land, we add criminal justice, we add veterans, all of those things. And lastly, you guys saw this, and I think you all have a copy of it, physical. But this is our Arc of Justice. This Arc of Justice will be a hub. It's a network, global, not only just to register and house social justice organizations, but a platform where we can connect. We can connect, we can build, we can strategize, and continue this conversation moving forward, right? It will provide training. It will provide education, will feature organizations. If your organization is looking for information on a particular topic, if you need resources to help your social justice initiative, this place will have it. It's like a one-stop shop, okay? I called it the Yelp of social justice issues, but it's more like a Walmart and Yelp put together, maybe. But all for social justice and all to bridge the gap so that we can have these discussions in real time. We don't have to wait. We don't have to wait for a flight. We don't necessarily have to wait for a Zoom because, again, that relies on you knowing that the Zoom is occurring. But if you're a part of the arc of justice, you'll see it all again in real time. That's all I have. Any questions?
One piece. Thank you so much, Linda. Really, that was excellent. Do folks have questions?
Questions, comments, not just from me either.
And just to be clear, right, why, at the opening there, I talked about the example of building healthcare at the state level, because that's the likely pathway to achieve universal healthcare. Universal justice, Lode just laid out an example that this is a pivotal point that the Black community is historically the most oppressed in this country, and that reparative justice needs to build and start with that community. And then everybody else's boat floats. Everybody else rises as a result. So this is is that a fair way of?
It is fair.
Okay.
So we've done the trickle-down effect repeatedly for centuries. Well, maybe not centuries, decades for sure, right? But the trickle-down effect does not work. It doesn't, it hasn't. However, when you are fixed on the pain point, what we call it a root cause analysis, you find the root cause of the issue and you fix the root cause, everything else is relieved.
So let's talk a little bit about how we build this strategy to win. But we didn't really have a chance for folks. We're a small enough group. Why don't we just introduce ourselves around the room and what it is that you're here to do? Like, what is it that you want? So let's just do that just to bring people into the conversation. Your name, where you're from, and why you're here?
Hi, my name is Mariah. I'm from Ohio, but I'm a student at the University of Hawaii. This has been a really amazing presentation. A lot of the work that I do, I'm in an English department, so I do work in literature and queer theory. But this has been really informative. A lot of the things I'm trying to work through are that, as we were discussing, that sort of intersectionality, particularly coming from like a queer theory perspective.
Hello, my name is Vineet. I'm from India. And the reason I came to this session is because the right-wing fascism is a global phenomena now, and how do we deal with it? It's not just US, and I was drawing the parallels you were saying, and I can easily, if you just replace maybe Christian with Hindu nationalism, I think more or less everything remains the same there.
I'm Elliot Benjamin. I'm in Maine, and I came here because I feel like resisting Trump should be part of the resistance network in the community here. And I just gave a workshop and had a stimulating small group discussion about how important and different activities one can do in that realm. I think it's consistent with this workshop. Chuck and I have been dialoguing about that a little bit.
What were your major takeaways from your workshop?
My takeaway was just about 3 people there were from third world countries who just felt so oppressed and difficult to speak up, and it made me realize that I need to continue to speak up because I can. I'm not at risk the way other people are, and just seeing the people, in person who are so affected by this in other countries by Trump's policies has been impactful to me.
Michael Beard, Nonviolence International, so I've come late, but I was at another interesting presentation, but wanted to make sure I got a little bit here. I think what I'm interested in at Nonviolence International is I'm interested in folks like you who are not just focused on nonviolent action as it's classically defined, extra-institutional kind of action, but you are looking at integrating fighting in the courts, fighting in the elections, and fighting for legislation and lobbying and all that stuff, in addition to nonviolent action. And that's why I'm particularly interested in what you're trying to do here, because I know you, Chuck, you come from we're going on all fronts here. We're not just focusing on nonviolent revolution and tactics. So I'm interested to learn what you're presenting and how we can contribute to and bring the nonviolent stuff in, but help you and this model, which I think is a more full integrated model for social change here, at least in the United States.
Hello, I'm Kalani Scheffler. I'm at the sociology department here at UMass Amherst. I guess what I've come away with most at at this conference is just learning all of the different approaches that everybody's taking and seeing. I think like the combination of people doing active work versus more scholarly oriented work is really fascinating to see, and have conversations across those two things that are too often separated out.
I'm Barbara Pearson. I'm from Amherst and One Payer States and a host of other resistance activities. My favorite one is singing resistance. I can't sing, but it's great to be in breathing together with everyone when you're protesting. But it would be great, but the idea being how to be more effective and how to be more integrated. And I think that's the key idea that Chuck and Rob and Olode are bringing to us.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm Rahmatullah. I live in Amherst. Basically, I'm from Balochistan, Pakistan. I did my PhD Abrid from Islamabad and UMass Amherst. So I'm a volunteer with Resistance Studies, and this conference I know Stalin from 2022. I did a short 6-month course workshop with him as a decolonizing resistance. So now again I'm trying to be a student of resistance and nonviolence student. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So Lede, we have about 15 minutes. So let me take a few minutes just to give an idea of a strategy building, kind of a step-by-step. And we were not able to get it over to the screen, but if you've signed up, I will absolutely send it to your email. This is a project that is the result of, I shared this with Michael and it's Kalan last night and some other folks around the table. As a 13-year-old, I read this book called Looking Backward, Edward Bellamy. And it was published in 1889. So he wrote from the perspective of the Gilded Age dystopian Boston. And dystopian Boston was a place where people felt a lot of pain. There was no state apparatus. There were no protections for workers. There was incredible poverty, suffering, homelessness, corruption, you name it. It was a society that was very much sideways. So what Edward Bellamy did is he wrote this book, which is a visionary story in which he transports the protagonist by the name of Julian, puts him to sleep in 1889 under a house in a tomb, and he wakes up in the year 2000. And he wakes up in Boston, but rather than it being a dystopian Boston, it's a utopian Boston. It's a society that has flipped the switch, a society where people care for each other. And it really got me excited about justice politics, where people are actually taking care of each other. And so the main point I want to get across to you all is that the book goes on to have a conversation between Julian and whose home, the person who owns the home. It's a physician. And the question is, how did we do this? How did we get here? What were the components of success? And it's a great way to think about strategy building. I made reference to this at the very top here, but it's actually seeing that future vision of universal justice, justice across the board. And it leads you to understand that the only way we are going to succeed is together. And the problem in American politics is that we're not together. And that's why the Arc of Justice Project, which is a reference to Martin Luther King's adaptation of words by a Unitarian minister in the 19th century, he puts it to poetic language, right? The moral arc of the universe bends toward justice, but it doesn't inevitably bend toward justice. We have to bend it collectively. And so what are the elements? What are the characteristics? What are the tenets of a successful strategy? It begins with that visioning exercise. It begins by seeing that future vision of a society that has turned it around, and then asking ourselves what I call deconstruction questions, right? Deconstructing or reverse engineering. And these involve such things as defining what strategy is. And I'm going to do this very quickly, but just to say that strategy is much like a recipe for a cake, a beautiful, wonderful, delicious cake. But the ingredients in that cake are just as important. The ingredients are the equivalent of the tactics. The ingredients have got to connect with the larger recipe or strategy. That's what we're really talking about here. And what are some of these steps? Well, we need to be mindful. You've all heard of SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. We have to be self-aware, and we also have to be other-aware. We need to identify our enemies and identify our potential friends and understand where they're coming from and what they're about and what they're doing. And with fascism, it's the critical tenet of fascism is it's about power. It's about establishing power, consolidating power, and expanding power. I taught Machiavelli's Prince for 30 years in the classroom, and it's basically the modern prescription for the prince, right? That's the whole idea is what do you do with power? The next three things are connecting our people, our politics, and our policies. Really in that order. We have to build deep relationships. We have to do horizontal organizing. That's our politics. We have to connect ourselves, get out of our silos, and we have to build the policy agenda that Lode was talking about around reparations. We lift the black community, and everything else spills out of that. That's the concept. That's the idea. The next thing is understanding that people are in different places at different times. That every social justice movement needs to be respected equally. So people who don't have housing, they're not thinking about healthcare necessarily. They're not necessarily thinking about climate. They're thinking about getting a roof over their head. So the idea here is just to create equality of understanding and welcoming people. Radical hospitality is what I call it. We need to develop new leadership models and decision making. This goes deeper, but I'm just touching on the top points. Communications. We need to communicate well internally. I'm part of so many different organizations, and we talk past each other. We're not, what did you say, or what were you doing? Did you commit to doing something? We need to be very clear in our internal communication as well as our external communication. Know your audience. Know what words trigger them. Know what words invite the conversation. So when we talk about one-payer states, the name of our organization is a great example. We call it one payer because it's the same thing as single payer. But when people hear the word single payer together, they hear socialism, the majority of the population. So language really matters. And then we need to, as I said, identify, define, and call out, and what we're up against. We need to be mindful of our organizations and what they look like. We can't allow our organizations to get stuck in a rut where everything becomes about preserving the organization, keeping the lights on, keeping the organization together, and then we lose sight of the mission of the organization. So our mission and our vision is health and healthcare justice for all. Health is everything else. Social determinants of health. We can have the best healthcare system in the world, but if people don't have housing, don't have quality food, are not free of gun violence and war and climate, then it's not going to work, right? And then finally, we need to think in terms of timelines, short, mid, and long term. We have to sustain ourselves over periods of time. Like HR 40 builds toward the actual reparations bill itself, as Lode mentioned. And then we also need to measure, quantify, and qualify our goals. We need to hold ourselves accountable. We need to have systems of accountability. We need to be able to analyze what we're doing. And we also need to prepare ourselves in terms of scenario planning. I'm doing work with Bill Fletcher, who's with the Trans-Africa Organization. He's a labor organizer. And we need to see what's potentially coming down the pike. We don't know if we're going to have an election this fall. We just don't know. You can't say what's going to happen. We just don't know. And what it's going to look like. And we're doing a conference in Philadelphia, right? November 13 and 14. Keep this in mind. It's going to be a hybrid conference. November 13 and 14. It's the Justice Solidarity and Strategy Summit. Lode, myself, and a handful of other folks are planning this for November 13 and 14. And we're also planning in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, January 3rd. Louisiana, of course, is where that Supreme Court decision crushing Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act came down. So we want to go to the center, the heart of white supremacy and voter suppression and crushing the black community in particular. So keep those 2 dates in mind. Also mid-August, August 15th, we're doing a training. We'll follow up with emails with you, but just note that this stuff is coming together. And then finally, we bring it all together, right? So from a future vision and reverse engineering and understanding, how did we do it? What were the elements? And basically, we want on the outside and the inside, in the streets, the suites, offline and online, in rural, suburban, exurban, and urban America, and in every state capital. So, and then a shout out to our good friend George Lakey. A great resource for this is the Nonviolent Database at Swarthmore College. It's a great resource for understanding how other countries and other societies have built more than 1,000 successful reform and revolutionary campaigns, including South Africa, which Lode referenced, beating back apartheid. I think anybody who was looking at that thought it was going to be an absolute bloodbath, and it wasn't. And one of the key ingredients was strong leadership. And we do not yet have strong leadership in this country, except us. We are the leadership. We have to see ourselves as those leaders. So I'll stop with that and say we'll open this up for some conversation for the last few minutes. Lode, do you want to add anything about your thoughts on strategy?
Yes, I just wanted to highlight here, when we talked about gutting Section 2 of the Civil Rights Act, we think of it as, we're taking the right to vote from black people, right? No, that part of the Civil Rights Act is saying that if you experience injustice, if you experience the inability to vote, meaning your county is telling you, yeah, come out to vote on this day, and then they change the dates, they change the hours, or then saying you're in line to vote, and then all of a sudden they're giving you a paper ballot, right? It takes away your ability to complain. It takes away your ability to go to your legal representative, to go to your county and say, hey, this injustice is happening. The reason why it doesn't just affect black people, because remember I said earlier, it is the harm that's targeted to black people that causes other demographics to suffer. All minorities is going to suffer because of that. It's not just black people, it's just the black people are on the paper, on the law. Right? Because remember I said it's the legislation that pushed the injustice through. So then stripping that and saying, hey, you can't sue. You can't sue. You can't say you were done wrong. You were just done wrong. Why this is important? Because as I began this, my portion, I said this is replicable. You can take this to your organization and zhuzh it up, as we like to say, we're going to zhuzh it up and make it fit what you have going on. Again, this is the intergenerational, interstate, international, cross borders collaboration. So if you need to write an omnibus act for your organization, for your particular demographic, here's a template, right? Verbiage and everything, verbiage and all. You do not know, but if you look up the Biden-Harris Omnibus Act of 2021, my organization's research, the recommendations for the Omnibus Act, what made the Omnibus Act came from my organization as well. I also co-authored that Omnibus Act. So I'm telling you, here's an outline for you. You have your verbiage, okay? Also with HR 40 policy briefs, it just shows you how to get in the room with your state legislator and talk about what it is that you know what you're there for. These policy briefs, you're able to write it yourself. Your organization can write it yourself. These bills, your organization can write it yourself. Take it to your representative. Don't wait for them to write the bill because they're not going to. Write it yourself and take it to them. They'll tell you what they have the capacity to do, what they don't have the capacity to do, and you can modify it, find other sponsors. Great, but take it to them. And don't just leave it with them. You have to drive them. You get what I'm saying? So that means you're at their office. Chuck is phenomenal at this. Chuck will knock on everybody's door every day. And that's at the nation's capital. My state capital knows me and my children. Everyone knows me. If you see me, you see my children. But our representatives at our state, the capital of Georgia, the great state of Georgia, they know myself and my children. Because guess what? You should have taken the Zoom meeting. Now I have to show up at your office. That's how you do it, okay? So again, take those. And again, this International Black Brain Trust is not just for Black people, it's for everyone. All oppressed people, we come, we share our ideas, we share what we have going on, and how we can help each other.
Any comments, feedback at the end here? Any questions? All right. Is everything making sense? Just the idea that resistance is not enough. We have to ground people in where we're going next. And that's where strategy is lacking, wholly lacking in almost all of our institutions, with almost all of our organizations. And that's why we're creating this, it's a utility, really. It's more than anything else. The Arc of Justice Alliance is a utility for people to come together and again, connect and learn and communicate and collaborate. So I'm very excited about this. I hope that you all will pass the good word to your peers, your cohorts, your friends, your family, your neighbors. Barbara?
I hope I'm not asking an unanswerable question, but when I look at the diagram, where's my point of entry?
The way this works is that once you've signed up on the sign-in sheet, we will put your name up on the website, and it's navigable, so you can just go to your name and claim your name and say, these are my organizations that I'm working with, and then invite those organizations to come into the site and define who they are. What's their mission? What's the vision? How can you be reached? Email, all that sort of demographic information. So it's a sort of, it houses your information so that people can connect with one another. So that you're in Amherst and you're working on voting rights, or you're working on healthcare justice. And little did you know that there was somebody across the town who's doing exactly the same, has formed a chapter associated with Healthcare Now, or maybe Labor for Single Payer, or maybe PNHP. You didn't even know they were there, but now you do. So the point of entry is simply to claim your name or your organization's name, and then define your purpose and point. So that's the idea. It's a work in progress. There's a lot more tools that we're applying here, but it's about 95% completed. So we'll be onboarding folks in the next month. So you'll be getting word to.
It's a big database. It's a big database.
Yes, it's not just a database, but it's a navigable place. And these are hubs or centers of collaboration. So for people who want to be doing research, they connect with other people doing research. Building strategy, same thing. Victory. People have had successes, but we don't hear about them. Here you'll be able to understand how people succeeded, what they did, and how they were able to accomplish those victories. Framing Lab is a way, it's basically, how do we frame, how do we discuss, how do we most effectively message. The so-called Big Beautiful Bill last year, everybody who was opposing it had a different phrase or a different frame or a different response. There was no unity of messaging. The way the right wing operates is they go behind closed doors, they hash it out, and then when they come out of those doors, they're all unified around message. So that's what we want to do, is create some discipline and connection and actually do focus groups so that we can actually test language and framing. And the same thing with rapid response. We need a war room. We need to be able to respond in real time. You know, one crisis comes after another, and then the press goes to Hakeem Jeffries or Chuck Schumer, and what's their response? I'll get back to you later. Like a major crisis. And they're not even responding because they don't know how to respond. They don't have a strategy and they're not connected. Coalition building, skills exchange, that's Loday's specialty is training. History, you know, I went over a little bit of the history. We need to understand where the right wing came from, you know, with the Powell memo and so forth, as well as visioning for the future, what we were talking about here, and then reverse engineering that whole process. Project 2027 is basically, it's to hold accountable legislators during the cycle when Trump is still in the White House, but we need to get people on record where you stand on wars, on genocide, on education, environment, and so forth. And then, you know, Honesty and Integrity Watch, that's basically a place where people can bring in whistleblowers to call out institutions and individuals for bad behavior, as well as a Project Enabler, which is basically tools to enable you to. And there are going to be other rooms that we create as well. This is just a starting point, just to kind of give you an idea of the places where people can connect and learn on any of it. And then there are going to be specific areas, like war and peace issues. There's going to be stuff on climate. There's going to be a place where people are dealing with immigration rights, reparations, and so forth. So this is just a starting point for you all. Does that clarify? Okay? We're at time, I think. Lode, final word? Thank you again, everybody. Appreciate you.
I just want to add that there will also be a shared calendar there. So when we have the trainings, when we have the organizations that are putting together their work groups, their think tanks, and all that stuff, it'll be on one calendar where we all have access to, and you can just hop in if it makes sense, if it fits your agenda. I just want to add that.
Well, give yourselves a hand. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Stay in touch, and we'll stay in touch with you as well. Thank you.